Continuing Coriolanus from Plutarch's Lives, translated by John Dryden, revised by Arthur Hugh Clough. Marcius, Coriolanus, therefore, as the fashion of candidates was, showing the scars and gashes that were so visible on his body, from the many conflicts in which he had signalized himself during a service of 17 years together, they were, so to say, put out of countenance at this display of merit, and told one another that they ought in common modesty to create him consul. But when the day of election was now come, and Marcius appeared in the forum, with a pompous train of senators attending him, and the patricians all manifesting greater concern, it seemed to be exerting greater efforts than they had ever done before on the like occasion. The commons then fell off again from the kindness they had conceived for him, and in the place of their late benevolence began to feel something of indignation and envy, passions assisted by the fear they entertained that if a man of such aristocratic temper and so influential among the patricians should be invested with the power which that office would give him, he might employ it to deprive the people of all that liberty which was yet left them. In conclusion, they rejected Marcius. Two other names were announced, to the great mortification of the senators, who felt as if the indignity reflected rather upon themselves than on Marcius. He, for his part, could not bear the affront with any patience. He had always indulged his temper, and had regarded the proud and contentious element of human nature as a sort of nobleness and magnanimity. Reason and discipline had not imbued him with that solidity and equanimity which enters so largely into the virtues of the statesman. He had never learned how essential it is for any one who undertakes public business and desires to deal with mankind to avoid above all things that self-will which, as Plato says, belongs to the family of solitude, and to pursue above all things that capacity so generally ridiculed of submission to ill treatment. Marcius, straightforward and direct, and possessed with the idea to vanquish and to overbear all opposition, is the true part of bravery, never imagining that it was the weakness and womanishness of his nature that broke out, so to say, in these ulcerations of anger, retired, full of fury and bitterness against the people. Now, if they're saying emotional ignorance, no, that's not the same thing as woman. And, plenty of men have, issues where their ignorance is attached to their emotions, or that they, let their feelings, lead them astray. The young patricians, too, all that were proudest and most conscious of their noble birth, had always been devoted to his interest, and, adhering to him now with a fidelity that did him no good, aggravated his resentment with the expression of their indignation and condolence. He had been their captain, and their willing instructor in the arts of war, when out upon expeditions, and their model in that true emulation and love of excellence which makes men extol without envy or jealousy each other's brave achievements. In the midst of these distempers, a large quantity of corn reached Rome, a great part brought up in Italy, but an equal amount sent as a present from Syracuse, from Gello, then reigning there. Many began now to hope well off their affairs, supposing the city by means would be delivered at once, both of its want and discord. A council, therefore, being presently held, the people came flocking about the Senate House, eagerly waiting the issue of that deliberation, expecting that the market prices would now be less cruel, and that what had come as a gift would be distributed as such. There were some within who so advised the Senate, but Marcius, standing up, sharply inveighed against those who spoke in favor of the multitude, calling them flatterers of the rabble, traitors to the nobility, and alleging that by such gratifications they did but cherish those ill seeds of boldness and petulance that had been sown among the people, that our own prejudice, which they should have done well to observe and stifle at their first appearance, and not have suffered the plebeians to grow so strong, by granting them magistrates of such authority as the tribunes. They were, indeed, even now formidable to the state, since everything they desired was granted them. No constraint was put on their will. They refused obedience to the consuls, and overthrowing all law and magistracy, gave the title of magistrate to their private factious leaders. When things are come to such as a pass for us to sit here and decree largesses and bounties for them, like those Greeks were, the populace is supreme and absolute. What would it be else, said he, but to take all their disobedience and to pay and maintain it for the common ruin of all? Now, those who are rich and leaders and such like that, basically the existence of the people makes all that possible. Less people get too uppity about it. 100 people are out there trying something and one person is successful at it. Well, those people trying it made that, help pave the way, right? Or set forth a consciousness which allowed success to come from. They certainly cannot look upon these liberties as a reward of public service, which they know they have so often deserted, nor yet of those successions by which they openly renounce their country, much less of the calumnies and slanders they have always been so ready to entertain against the Senate. Nowadays, up and down, pretty much everybody's willing to lie or say stuff that they don't know for political reasons, which, people shouldn't be doing. But will rather conclude that a bounty which seems to have no other visible cause or reason must needs be the effect of our fear and flattery. At will, therefore, set no limit to their disobedience, nor ever cease from disturbances and sedition. Concession is mere madness. If we have any wisdom and resolution at all, we shall, on the contrary, never rest till we have recovered from them that tribunician power they have extorted from us, and being a plain subversion of the consulship and a perpetual ground of separation in our city, it is no longer one as heretofore, but has in this received such a wound and rupture as is never likely to close and unite again, or suffer us to be of one mind, and to give over inflaming our distempers, and being a torment to each other. Marcius, with much more to this purpose, succeeding to an extraordinary degree in inspiring the younger men with the same furious sentiments, and had almost all the wealthy on his side, who cried him up as the only person in their city, had, superior alike to force and flattery. Some of the older men, however, opposed him, suspecting the consequences, as indeed there came no good of it, for the tribunes who were present, perceiving how the proposal of Marcius took, ran out into the crowd with exclamations, calling upon the plebeians to stand together and to come in to their assistance. The assembly met and soon became tumultuous. The sum of what Marcius had spoken, having been reported to the people, excited them to such fury that they were ready to break in upon the Senate. The tribunes prevented this by laying all the blame on Coriolanus, whom therefore they cited by their messengers to come before them and defend himself. And when he contemptuously repulsed the officers who brought him the summons, they came themselves with the adilas, or overseers of the market. Nazi is Hebrew for overseer, so but they use that as a slur before the NSDAP, as the Slavic people to the whatever. But Gershom Scholem, this doesn't really have anything to do with it, but yeah, Gershom Scholem criticized people. It's like, well, you're supporting the fascists, the communists, and now you're supporting Zionism. It's does it matter which one of the three you're supporting? Proposing to carry him away by force, and accordingly began to lay hold on his person. The patricians, however, coming to his rescue, not only thrust off the tribunes, but also beat Attalus, that were their seconds in the quarrel. Night approaching put an end to the contest, but as soon as it was day, the consuls, observing the people to be highly exasperated, and that they ran from all quarters and gathered in the forum, were afraid for the whole city, that, convening the Senate afresh, they desired them to advise how they might best compose and pacify the incensed multitude by equitable language and indulgent decrees, since, if they wisely considered the state of things, they would find that it was no time to stand upon terms of honor and a mere point of glory. Such a critical conjuncture called for gentle methods and for temperate and humane counsels. The majority, therefore, of the senators giving way, the consuls proceeded to pacify the people in the best manner they were able, answering gently to such imputations and charges as has been cast upon the Senate, and using much tenderness and moderation in the admonitions and reproofs they gave them. On the point of the price of provisions, they said there should be no difference at all between them, when a greater part of the commonalty was grown cool, and it appeared from their orderly and peaceful behavior that they had been very much appeased by what they had heard. The tribunes, standing up, declared, in the name of the people, that since the Senate was pleased to act soberly and do them reason, they likewise should be ready to yield in all that was fair and equitable on their side. They must insist, however, that Marcius should give in his answer to the several charges as follows. First, could he deny that he instigated the Senate to overthrow the government and annul the privileges of the people? And in the next place, when called to account for it, did he not disobey the summons? And lastly, by the blows and other public affronts to the Attalus, had he not done all he could to commence a civil war? Well, nowadays it's certainly the so-called liberal media that's it's like, no, you can't excuse the mobs in the street. No. And you can't stir up this hatred against the other side like that. These articles brought in against him with the design either to humble Marcius. You know, the H is messed up and there's a line, so it looks like an L, so pause me for a second. And show his submission, if contrary to his nature, he should now court and sue the people, or if he should follow his natural disposition, which they rather expected from their judgment of his character, then that he might thus make the breach final between himself and the people. He came, therefore, as it were, to make his apology and clear himself, in which belief the people kept silence, and gave him a quiet hearing. But when, instead of the submissive and depreciatory language expected from him, he began to use not only an offensive kind of freedom, seeming rather to accuse than apologize, but as well as the tone of his voice and the air of countenance, displayed a security that was not far from disdain and contempt of them. The whole multitude then became angry, and gave evident signs of impatience and disgust, and Sicinius, the most violent of the tribunes, after a little private conference with his colleagues, proceeded solemnly to pronounce before them all that Marcius was condemned to die by the tribunes of the people, and to bid Attalus to take him to the Tarpeian rock, and without delay throw him headlong from the precipice. Oh, he's throwing people off cliffs, these people. One day, however, in compliance with the order, came to seize upon his body. Many even of the plebeian party felt that it to be a horrible and extravagant act. The patricians, meantime, wholly beside themselves, with distress and horror, hurried up with cries to the rescue, and while some made actual use of their hands to hinder the arrest, and surrounding Marcius, got him in among them, others, as in so great a tumult no good could be done by words, stretched out theirs, beseeching the multitude that they would not proceed to such furious extremities. And at length the friends and acquaintances of the tribunes, wisely perceiving how impossible it would be to carry off Marcius to punishment without much bloodshed and slaughter of the nobility, persuaded them to forbear everything unusual and odious, not to dispatch him by any sudden violence or without regular process, but refer the cause to the general suffrage of the people. Sicinius then, after a little pause, turning to the patricians, demanded what their meaning was, thus forcibly to rescue Marcius out of the people's hands, as they were going to punish him, when it was replied by them on the other side, and the question put, rather, how came it into your minds, and what is it you design, thus to drag one of the worthiest men of Rome, without trial, to a barbarous and illegal execution? Very well, said Sicinius. You shall have no ground in this respect for quarrel or complaint against the people. The people grant your request, and your patrician shall be tried. We appoint you, Marcius, directing his speech to him the third market day ensuing, to appear and defend yourselves, and to try if you can satisfy the Roman citizens of your innocence, who will then judge your case by vote. The patricians were content with such a truce and respite for the time, and gladly returned home, having for the present brought off Marcius in safety. During the interval before the appointed time, for the Romans hold these sessions every 9th day, which from that cause are called Mundina in Latin. A war fell out with anti-ates, likely to be of some continuance, which gave them hope they might one day or other elude the judgment. The people they pursued would become tractable, and their indignation lessen and languish by degrees in so long a space, if occupation in war did not wholly put it out of their mind. But when, contrary to expectation, they made a speedy agreement with the people of Antium, and the army came back to Rome, the patricians were again in great perplexity, and had frequent meetings to consider how things might be arranged, without either abandoning Marcius or yet giving occasion to the popular orators to create new disorders. Appius Claudius, whom they counted among the senators most averse to the popular interest, made a solemn declaration and told them beforehand that the Senate would utterly destroy itself and betray the government if they should once suffer the people to assume the authority of pronouncing sentence upon any of the patricians. But the oldest senators, and the most favorable to the people, maintained, on the other side, that the people would not be so harsh and severe upon them as some were pleased to imagine, but rather become more gentle and humane upon the concession of that power, since it was not contempt of the Senate, but the impression of being contemned by it, which made them pretend to such a prerogative. Let that be once allowed them as a mark of respect and kind feeling, and the mere possession of this power of voting would at once dispossess them of their animosity. When therefore Marcius saw that the Senate was in pain and suspense upon his account, divided as it were betwixt their kindness for him and apprehensions from the people, he desired to know of the tribunes what the crimes were they intended to charge him with, and what the heads of the indictment they would oblige him to plead before the people. And being told by them that he was to be impeached for attempting usurpation, and that they would prove him guilty of designing to establish arbitrary government, stepping forth upon this, "Let me go then," he said, "to clear myself from this imputation before an assembly of them. I freely offer myself to any sort of trial, nor do I refuse any kind of punishment whatsoever. Only," he continued, "let what you now mention be really made my accusation, and do not you play false with the Senate." On their consenting to these terms, he came to his trial. But when the people met together, the tribunes, contrary to all former practice, extorted first that votes should be taken, not by centuries, but tribes, a change by which the indignant and factious rabble Okay, yeah, sometimes I stop and, because we're not using the G sound if we're, going Latin or something. That had no respect for honesty and justice, would be sure to carry it against those who were rich and well known, and accustomed to serve the state in war. In the next place, whereas they had engaged to prosecute Marcius upon no other head but that of tyranny, which could never be made out against him, they relinquished this plea, and urged instead his language in the Senate against an abasement of the price of corn, and for the overthrow of the tribunician power, adding further as a new impeachment the distribution that was made of him of the spoil and the booty he had taken from the Antiates when he overran their country, which he had divided among those that had followed him, whereas it ought rather to have been brought into the public treasury, which last accusation did, they say, more discompose Marcius than all the rest, as he had not anticipated. Oh, there's no T here. Anticipated he should ever be questioned on that subject, and therefore was less provided with any satisfactory answer to it on the sudden. And when, by way of excuse, he began to magnify the merits of those who had been partakers with him in the action, and those that had stayed at home being more numerous than the other, interrupted him with outcries. In conclusion, when they came to vote, a majority of 3 tribes condemned him, the penalty being perpetual banishment. The sentence of his condemnation being pronounced, the people went away with greater triumph and exultation than they had ever shown for any victory over enemies, while the Senate was in grief and deep dejection, repenting now and vexed to the soul that they had not done and suffered all things rather than give way to the insolence of the people, and permit them to assume and abuse so great an authority. There was no need then to look at men's dresses or other marks of distinction, to know one from another. Any one who was glad was, beyond all doubt, a plebeian. Any one who looked sorrowful, a patrician. Marcius alone himself was neither stunned nor humiliated. In mien, carriage, and countenance he bore the appearance of entire composure, and, while all his friends were full of distress, seemed the only man that was not touched with his misfortune. Not that either reflection taught him or gentleness of temper made it natural for him to submit. He was wholly possessed, on the contrary, with a profound and deep-seated fury, which passes with many for no pain at all. And one of the things so many people talk about, their nature. And it's like, well, if they've developed this sense about them that's different than their nature, well, they're still going to think of it as their nature. Now, it's not in my nature to do what's good or true, or to emotionally control themselves or something, but it depends on, we all submit to something. And pain, it is true, transmuted, so to say, by way of its own fiery heat and anger, loses every appearance of depression and feebleness. The angry man makes a show of energy, as the man in a high fever does of natural heat, while in fact all this action of the soul is but mere diseased palpitation, distension, and inflammation. That such was his distempered state appeared presently plainly enough in his actions. On his return home, after saluting his mother and his wife, who were all in tears and full of loud lamentations, and exhorting them to moderate the sense they had of his calamity, he proceeded at once to the city gates, whither all the nobility came to attend him, and so not so much as taking anything with him, or making any request to the company, he departed from them, having only 3 or 4 clients with him. He continued solitary for a few days in a place in the country, distracted with a variety of counsels, such as rage and indignation suggested to him, and proposing to himself no honorable or useful end, but only how he might best satisfy his revenge on the Romans. He resolved at length to raise up a heavy war against them from their nearest neighbors. He determined first to make trial of the Volscians, whom he knew to be still vigorous and flourishing, both in men and treasure, and he imagined their force and power was not so much abated as their spite and anger increased by late overthrows they had received from the Romans. There was a man of Antium called Tullus Aufidius, who for his wealth and bravery, and the splendor of his family, had the respect and privilege of a king among the Volscians, but whom Marcius knew to have a particular hostility to himself above all other Romans. Frequent menaces and challenges had passed in battle between them, and those exchanges of defiance to which their hot and eager emulation is apt to prompt young soldiers had private animosity to their national feelings of opposition. Yet for all this, considering Tullus to have a certain generosity of temper, and knowing that no Volscian, so much as he, desired an occasion to require upon the Romans the evils they had done, he did what so much confirms the saying that hard and unequal is, with wrath, the strife which makes us buy its pleasure with our life. Putting on such a dress would make him appear to any whom he might meet most unlike what he really was, like Ulysses, the town he entered of his mortal foes. His arrival at Antium was about evening, and though several met him in the streets, yet he passed along without being known to any, went directly to the house of Tullus, and entering undiscovered, and went up to the fire hearth, and seated himself there without speaking a word, covering up his head. Those of the family could not but wonder, and yet they were afraid either to raise or question him, for there was a certain air of majesty both in his posture and silence. But they recounted to Tullus, being then at supper, the strangeness of this accident. He immediately rose from table and came in, and asked who he was, and for what business he came thither. And then Marcius, unmuffling himself and pausing a while, "If," said he, "you cannot call me to mind, Tullus, or do not believe your eyes concerning me, I must of necessity be my own accuser. I am Caius Marcius, the author of so much mischief to the Volscians, of which, were I seeking to deny it, the surname of Coriolanus I now bear would be a sufficient evidence against me. The one recompense I have received for all the hardships and perils I have gone through was the title that proclaims my enmity to your nation, and this is the only thing which is still left of me. Of all other advantages I have been stripped and deprived by the envy and outrage of the Roman people, and the cowardice and treachery of the magistrates and those of my own order. I am driven out as an exile and become an humble suppliant at your hearth, not so much for safety and protection should I have come hither, had I been afraid to die, as to seek vengeance against those that expelled me, which, methinks, I have already obtained by putting myself into your hands. If, therefore, you have really a mind to attack your enemies, come then, make use of that affliction you see me in to assist the enterprise, and convert my personal infelicity into a common blessing to the Volscians, as indeed I am likely to be more serviceable in fighting for them against you, with the advantage which I now possess of knowing all the secrets of the enemy that I am attacking. But if you decline to make any further attempts, I am neither desirous to live myself, nor will it be well in you to preserve a person who has been your rival and adversary of old and now, when he offers you his service, appears unprofitable and useless to you. Tullus, on hearing this, was extremely rejoiced, and giving him his right hand, exclaimed, Rise, Marcius, and be of good courage. It is a great happiness you bring to Antium, and the present use you make of yourself. Expect everything that is good from the Volscians. He then proceeded to feast and entertain him with every display of kindness for several days. After, they were in close deliberation together on the prospects of a war. And I guess we'll start that next paragraph next time.